is the 718 Boxster GTS 4.0 in racing yellow paint. What you see in front of you is a dead man walking, because this is the last all internal combustion engine Boxster lineup that Porsche ever says they're going to have. Matter of fact, while this car is still on sale here in the US, it's already been discontinued in Europe. So we're in for a hell of a ride with literally a last of its kind here on our hands with the Porsche Boxster GTS 4.0. I'm Alex, your host, and join me for Test Drive Boxster GTS. For this test drive, we have one question. The Boxster has always been Porsche's more affordable entry-level option into owning a Porsche. But with the GTS having a base price over 6 figures, the 911's little brother is starting to feel a little bit pricier. So our question is this: is the 911's little brother actually worth a 6-figure price tag? So we're getting on a bit of a hot streak here where the engines aren't under the front of the hood, they're in the middle of the car with the C8 Stingray and of course this 718 Boxster GTS. Not under the hood, but behind the driver sits a naturally aspirated 4.0 liter flat 6. That flat 6 is good for 394 horsepower and 317 pound-feet of torque. That's good to get the GTS 0 to 60 in 3.8 seconds. The quarter mile passes by in 12 seconds flat at 118 miles an hour. Top speed for this Boxster, 179 miles an hour. The Porsche Boxster story, and the Cayman for that matter, is pretty interesting because in the 1990s, Porsche wasn't in the greatest of financial spots. Turns out producing lower volume, high intensity cars is not the most profitable business, especially as sales were declining at that time. So in 1993, the concept car that would become the Porsche Boxster actually debuted at the Detroit Auto Show. And a few years later, in 1997, you got the car that debuted as the Porsche Boxster.
While the Boxster debuted in soft top form back in 1997, the hardtop Cayman didn't come around until 9 years later in 2006.
So if you trace the Boxster's lineage, it goes back to the water-cooled 986 that debuted back in 1997. Now naturally, the next one that came about was the 987 before they debuted the third generation called the 981. So how did they get from 981 down to 718? Well, when Porsche debuted this generation of Boxster, they wanted to pay homage to the mid-engine race car that they used to have, the 718. So when they rebadged this, they didn't go for 982, they didn't go for 979, they went for 718, paying homage, at least in their minds, to an older generation car that inspired this Boxster.
Or, with the classic 718 utilizing a 4-cylinder engine, was it subtle foreshadowing of the modern 718 to come?
So this GTS is part of the 718 model lineup, the 4th generation of Boxsters to come out. And when I say 718, some longtime Porsche enthusiasts may start to feel their skin crawl. Why is that? Well, the 718's known for one major thing when it debuted in 2017. Porsche took away the flat 6 that was the base of every one of those Boxster and Cayman cars of those previous generations, and in the 718, they put in a forced induction turbocharged 4-cylinder for every one of their variants, from the base level Boxster all the way up to the GTS. They all used a turbocharged 4-cylinder. and reception was not great for that 4-cylinder. A lot of people said it sounded terrible, more Subaru-ish than Porsche that they grew up with. So enthusiasts complained loudly to Porsche, and give credit to Porsche, they heard the complaints. And in 2020, just a few years later after the 718 debuted, they axed the GTS of the time and brought the GTS 4.0 that you see here to the market in 2020. And that GTS came with two things. It only came with a manual transmission back in 2020, but it brought back the flat six that so many enthusiasts say were missing from their Porsche experience. So for the 718, you can either choose Boxster or Cayman, and basically the only difference there is whether you have this soft top convertible, which the Boxster's always had, or the hard top, which the Cayman is always specialized in. But amongst that, there are 4 different variants of the Boxster that you can choose from. The very base level, Boxster, and then of course one level up, the Boxster S. They both utilize a turbocharged 4-cylinder still, but the fun really begins when you move up one more from the Boxster S to this GTS 4.0. Of course, that's where it has that flat 6 and really brings a driving experience that's much more engaging and connected to the driver. There is one more variant, one level up from this GTS, and that is the GT4 RS Spyder. And essentially what that is your track Boxster. It is the Porsche Boxster in its ultimate final boss form, the one that you absolutely want to take to the track. No, this GTS 4.0 sits right in the pinnacle of performance and daily driving, and you could absolutely do that with this Boxster GTS. So the engine here has a little bit of interesting lore. Right, like you take the 4.0 liter that's tattooed on the side of this car, realize that that's the flat 6 they're using, and you may start to ask yourself, is that the same 4.0 flat 6 that they're using in the GT3? I mean, it matches up perfectly, 4.0 liter to 4.0 liter. Why would you not just port that over into this car? But that's inaccurate. Actually, Porsche engineers say what they did was take the current Carrera engine, remove the turbochargers, and basically stroke and bore it out to 4.0 from that lower 3.0 liter that the Carrera utilizes. So while it does match up perfectly in displacement 4.0 with the GT3's engine, this car's actually got more of a tuned Carrera engine than it does the actual GT3.
In a bit of irony, the Spyder RS I just mentioned did originally share the GTS's 4.0 liter upon their debut, but fast forward to 2025, that Spyder RS now has transitioned to using a variation of the GT3's engine. So in the end, this GTS is the only car using that custom-built 4-liter.
The GTS uses Porsche's adaptive adjustable suspension, and it's phenomenal. This GTS actually sits 20 millimeters lower than a Boxster S, and with that mid-engine tucked right behind the driver, it creates a phenomenal handling experience. At only 3,200 and some change pounds, this is a very light car. And when you command it to do something, it feels more go-kart-ish than muscle car-ish. It will go wherever you point it with a lot of enthusiasm. I compare it to something like the mid-engine Corvette. It's a completely different driving experience. When you were hurtling into corners in the Corvette, you could feel the weight of that car fighting against the adaptive suspension. With this Porsche, it feels like you have nothing on you. And that's a hell of an experience. When you're talking about handling, the rubber and tire setup is phenomenal. You have two 35 20-inch rims up front and two 65 20-inch in the rear. And that's all the grip you need for a car that only weighs 3,200 pounds. Brake feel is phenomenal, and it's a pretty straightforward setup. You have 13.8-inch rotors all around the vehicle, on the front and rear. They're vented and cross-drilled, carbon ceramic rotors, so you don't have a hint of fade. These things bite really well. These brakes are absolutely right up there with the M4 competition for some of the best ones that we've had on this channel. When the GTS debuted in 2020, it only came in 6-speed manual transmission. Now, Porsche has added a 7-speed PDK, which stands for Porsche Doppelkupplung transmission that has been phenomenal and utilized across Porsche for a long time. It's a great transmission. We have this 7-speed automatic PDK in this Porsche. I would definitely have a preference for ripping up 6 gears, but as far as performance goes, of course these things snap shifts like that, and it is a lightning fast experience. One of the things I really appreciate about the gearing of the GTS is that it really lets you rev it out. One of the problems I had with the Corvette is that it's so lightning fast, snapping through the shifts, that you don't really have the chance to rev the engine out unless you start in a taller gear and just let it go. With the GTS, it really lets you ring it out, and the sound experience is better for it. The exhaust on the GTS is pretty straightforward. It shares the same dual mode active exhaust system with its GT4 RS Spyder older brother. And unlike the 4-cylinder turbocharged engines that were powering the GTS before this, it has actual sound. The exhaust note doesn't so much roar as it does wail as it approaches that 7,900 RPM red line. And I think it sounds pretty good. Honestly, it almost sounds better with the top up than it did with the top down. What do you all think of the exhaust notes? I think that for a naturally aspirated flat 6, it sounds pretty good, but I will say this is one of the few cars that it wears on you the longer you drive in it. The interior of the GTS is pretty clean and straightforward. There's nothing overly in your face here that's unnecessary. It's very open despite being a tight car. A lot of button operated features, so we like that.
In the GTS, you have old school beautiful analog gauges and a straightforward 7-inch infotainment screen with Apple CarPlay compatibility. But this sharp clock face at the top of the dash may have caught your eye. It's part of the Sport Chrono package, optional on all Boxster S's, but standard on the GTS. It's a performance package that adds steering wheel mounted drive modes, which we'll get to in a minute, but also this stopwatch-like feature, which Porsche says you can use to measure lap times.
There's nothing overly in your face about it. It's a pretty modest screen, a very clean setup, but the GTS really doesn't have a spot for your cell phone. Matter of fact, one of the options you can do is to have a phone compartment here that Porsche offers as an option, but it's a tight interior. You know, with the Corvette, they had a wireless charging pad right here in between the driver and the passenger's shoulders, and Porsche could have done something like that here, but opted not to. You know, I mentioned that there's not much interior storage space, but there is a good bit of exterior storage space, whether it's the frunk that you have here or the very compact trunk that sits right behind the engine. The Boxster gives you more space than you would think for a tiny 2-seater car, at least for storage. When it comes to interior storage, there's very little room for anything like a cell phone or even a drink. To get the cup holder out, you have to pop a dash button. It will shoot out a little plasticky cup holder that does not inspire much confidence. It seems a little flimsy. No, Porsche really wants you to concentrate on the driving experience, and no coffee, cell phones, anything like that while you're in the Porsche. So if you've watched any of the other test drive videos, you know that we've been on a hot streak when it comes to audio systems in cars, outside of the last Aston Martin V8 Vantage. And this GTS absolutely is no exception to that phenomenal audio experience. The GTS has three different audio trim options available. At the very base level, you have a 105 watt, 6-speaker, probably fairly lackluster audio system. But for under $1,000, you can upgrade to a 10-speaker, 505 watt Bose audio system that sounds phenomenal, and that's what this GTS has. But if you find yourself with $4,700 extra dollars, you can actually equip the GTS in a 12-speaker, 821 watt Burmeister audio system plus a 300 watt active subwoofer. I'm here to tell you that the Bose speaker system that's $900 is more than kick-ass enough for anything that you want to listen to in the GTS. But I would be interested in what nearly a $5,000 audio system looks like. I have to give real compliments to the interior comfort of the GTS. I anticipated this being a tight experience going into this car. After all, 3,200 pounds, two-seater, it's going to be a tight experience, but really, just by myself here, of course, I have plenty of shoulder room above my head. I don't feel cramped at all. In the Corvette, you kind of had a dividing wall between you and the passenger, and you felt like you sat so damn low. The GTS, you do sit low, but it doesn't give that same feeling. Like, it's easy to see over the hood. There aren't those same blind spots that you had from the B-pillars in the Corvette. No, I would say it's actually above expectations when it comes to the interior comfort. And these seats aren't torture devices. They hold me in very well.
But Porsche does give you a number of options to get comfortable with. For a mere $3,000, you can order 3D printed seats in the Goldilocks configuration of your choosing. No, seriously, there are 3 different versions, and Porsche has a helpful weight chart to help you choose your size. Word of advice, the regular seats in the GTS are just fine.
Let's talk exterior styling on the Boxster GTS for a moment. If you're a fan for how the Boxster debuted, then you're probably going to still like the design that comes in 2025 with the GTS, because there have not really been substantial changes to the exterior design of that vehicle since it really first appeared on the market in 1997. It's always had that timeless, compact frame, mid-engine design. Do the eyes look a little buggy? Maybe, but they're very characteristic Porsche Boxster and Cayman. There's very little change in the 4th generation of Boxsters that have come.
The GTS has either the option of standard xenon adaptive headlights, or for a nominal fee, you can upgrade to the LED adaptive headlights, which this GTS has here.
Man, I do not know about getting this car in racing yellow. This thing's already a cop magnet as a Porsche to begin with. Paint it in school bus yellow and try and blend in, there's zero chance. So you either have to be a very disciplined driver and of course always adhere to the law, or you've got to have a lot of money for insurance and speeding tickets, because this car is going to lend itself to doing that naturally. Painted in school bus yellow, it's going to attract some attention. You know, I've talked about how I'm more of a sunroof guy, hardtop sunroof guy than a convertible guy, but both the Corvette and this GTS are making me rethink that. This is a phenomenal open air experience, and you don't feel like you're just out there in the open, maybe because of the windscreen behind you and the anti-roll pillars. If you're in a climate where you can enjoy the Porsche, the Boxster is probably the way to go, especially since the Cayman doesn't offer a sunroof.
The GTS has a very subtle, retractable spoiler. Similar to the RS5 we drove, over 75 miles an hour, the spoiler will automatically deploy, but should you want to manually deploy it yourself, a simple press of this button will do the trick.
I will say one thing when it comes to top speed though. 179 feels like a very high top speed for this light of a car. The back end does start to get a little squirrely at high speeds, so I can see why the GT4 RS Spyder does use a much more obtuse fixed wing, because really this thing needs some downforce, and the spoiler that's on the back of this Boxster is more for reducing lift than it is about actually keeping the back end down. And I think you need something that keeps the back end down, especially at high speeds, because this is just such a light go-kart-like car. With the GTS, you get a very nice steering wheel contoured to your hands, nothing overly complex about it, but you do have, right at the twist of your fingers here, a driving mode option where you can switch between the 4 different driving modes. The softest, most plush mode is going to be normal driving mode, and that's your default setting. Next one up, Sport. One up from there, Sport Plus, which is the most aggressive of the 3. As I mentioned, individual, you can customize to your heart's content. One thing I don't love is that this car tries to emphasize some eco features that really don't fit in with the sports car driving experience. Auto stop and auto start is one of the standard features on this vehicle. Very common for every other vehicle, not necessarily performance car focused though. And then the second one that's fairly common is cylinder deactivation. And when this flat 6 goes down to 3 cylinders, it's a terrible sounding experience while you're droning on the highway. I understand they added those features to probably get a little bit more efficiency out of this car, maybe let it last a little longer, especially when it comes to Europe pollution regulations. But they don't belong on a sports car like this, in my opinion, and the driving experience is worse for it. Oh, come on, dude. The auto on and off feature is really annoying. It will literally turn the car off before you have a chance to come to a full stop. It's not a feature that fits with this car. But the beauty, see, did it again. Beauty is if you just go ahead and turn it to Sport or Sport Plus, it will disable that auto on and off feature as well as the cylinder deactivation, so a good reason to keep it in a sportier setting. If you want to talk competition for the 718 GTS, it's really hard to land on close competition. Maybe you could bring up the M2, but it's an entirely different setup. Obviously, it's front engine, but that small compact frame. Power on the M2 competition has over 50 more horsepower than this car and a substantial more amount of torque coming from that 3-liter twin turbo setup. No, the driving experience between an M2 competition and this GTS are just two very different things. Maybe you want to throw in another mid-engine car, you would choose the C8 Corvette, but I have to stress that even though it's well over 100 more horsepower and a substantial amount more of torque, that is a muscle car driving experience. It feels heavy. It feels like you're surrounded by a gigantic machine with the Corvette, where this thing's just the complete opposite. It's light, go-kart-like, able to be whipped around at your whim. No, this thing's much more playful than the Corvette is, even if they're both that mid-engine design. So I don't know if this car really has a close competitor. So what are some of the positives behind the GTS? Well, for starters, there's a flat 6 powering this car that wasn't meant to exist. Remember, they didn't take the 4-liter flat 6 from the GT3 and poured it over into this car. No, Porsche engineers literally took the Carrera engine, broke it down, took the turbocharged option off of it, and made it bigger. And that's how you got this unique to this 718 4.0 liter flat 6. Porsche and auto enthusiasts alike benefited from this car in the middle of its swan song of a generation, going from a turbocharged 4-cylinder back to that flat 6 that powers this car. And this is one of the rare instances where people complaining actually won. And the flat 6 that sits right here is definitely a battle that makes it feel like we won. Another positive, the chassis that underlies the Boxster all the way from its base form up to the GT4 RS Spyder. Look, this mid-engine design with only 3,200 pounds leads to a go-kart-like driving experience. This thing can corner like it's on rails. Because it doesn't have that mass, you can really push it hard and into corners, and it doesn't feel like it's about to give. One thing I will say, because it is a little light, it does tend to get a little squirrely on the back end at high speeds. That doesn't really generate a lot of confidence at those speeds. Maybe the GT4 RS is right with that gigantic wing that does increase downforce. Another positive? Well, how about the fact that this is a surprisingly great daily driver? Again, even though it sits so low, it's not hard to get in and out of. It's a car that's very easy to get through traffic, and while it doesn't maybe have some of the interior comfort features that I would look for, it is a very accessible, very easy to drive car with a ton of power and track capability that you can just blend into traffic with. Well, maybe not blend into traffic in racing yellow, but you know what I mean. You can very much comfortably fit into traffic. So on the other side, what are some of the negatives behind the GTS? All right, one negative? The interior space, and I'm not talking about the room for your driver comfort, because it's actually very comfortable within this car. I'm talking about the accessories. Americans love their morning cup of coffee on the way to work, and while this does have cup holders, they don't inspire any confidence. And then you go ahead and look at really the lack of place to put your cell phone anywhere, and it's like Porsche really wants you just to concentrate on the driving experience within the 718. On the negative side, well, how about eco features that just really don't belong in the GTS's driving experience? You can feel when the flat 6 deactivates down to 3 cylinders. You could definitely get frustrated when you're still rolling actively through a parking lot, the auto start and stop feature for the engine kicks in and disables your engine while you're still rolling. Look, I just don't think that you probably get the efficiency that you really wanted from a percentage perspective out of those eco features, and they definitely don't belong with the GTS driving experience. One of the negatives? Look, this car is gone. It was an unbelievable amount of hope, really, when the flat 6 4-liter came back in the middle of the 718's generation, but it is on the way out. This is a dead man walking. Porsche is testing now EV Boxster and Caymans without any kind of camouflage. We know it's coming. That means they're pretty confident in the design. Look, this car's not even for sale in Europe anymore because of cybersecurity regulations, so this was literally a swan song to that flat 6 that powers the 718, and we're not going to see anything like that going forward, especially as they concentrate on moving this to an all-electric platform. Now to answer the question we started with. Put simply, is this last generation of internal combustion engine 718s and the flat 6 that powers this GTS worth over 6 figures? In my opinion, not necessarily. And don't get me wrong, I don't hate one thing about this car. Just 6 figures is a very expensive price tag for what you get. If you really love the mid-engine experience, starting 30 grand lower, you can get a Corvette that has over 100 more horsepower, and admittedly is a very different driving experience, much more on the muscle car than this light go-kart experience is. You're paying a lot for this vehicle, and maybe it's because I had such high expectations for the flat 6 that's powering this, with that being the swan song going out. But I don't know if I had 103 grand to spend that it would be on the GTS. Now, if we had the chance to test drive this in manual, would I have a different opinion? Very much maybe. And this does come in manual, we just have the automatic version.
And if you're talking fully unleashing the 718 frame's capabilities, originally the Spyder RS came with the same flat 6 as this GTS, just tuned slightly different. But now, that Spyder RS does come with the GT3's 4.0-liter flat 6. 164K price tag notwithstanding, the Spyder RS bringing 99 more horsepower and a 9,000 RPM redline in this same frame is going to offer a significantly different driving experience.
This car does make you feel. It just costs a little bit to get there. So what do you think? What did I get right? And I can't wait to hear what I got wrong. What are your thoughts on the Boxster GTS? Do you think that if you had 100 grand, this is an easy car right up there at the top for you to spend on? Or do you maybe agree with me and think that 100 grand's a high starting price for any car, and maybe you're paying a little bit of a collector's fee to get your hands on the last naturally aspirated flat 6 that's going to power the Boxster generation? Because don't get me wrong, again, I love this car. It is a car that makes you feel. The future Boxster EVs will not deliver the same feel, I can promise you that. So if you do want the last and best flat 6 available in Boxster form, the GTS might be a great car for you. Thank you for watching Test Drive Boxster GTS. This is the 9th in our test drive series of videos. As I've said, our whole goal on this channel is to get our hands on cars that make you feel like this Boxster GTS does. Because face it, even though as we transition to EVs, you get great straight line performance and instant acceleration, you lose feel. The feel of revving up a flat 6 to nearly an 8,000 RPM redline. The feel of whipping a nimble car only at 3,200 pounds into a corner and having it just feel like it's on rails. And face it, this Boxster is a dead man walking. The internal combustion engines powering this car have already been killed in Europe because of all things cybersecurity regulations, and the EV Boxsters are on the way. So this is a beautiful swan song to the last of the flat 6, even if it's maybe not worth, in my opinion, the high 6-figure starting price. So if you enjoyed this video, it would mean the world to me if you hit like, and if you're enjoying what we're doing on this channel and want to see more test drive videos, consider clicking subscribe, because we're going to be trying to get our hands on cars just like this GTS, cars that make you feel, and that seems to be something that's going extinct. If you made it to the end of the video, no, we appreciate the hell out of you. I'm Alex, your host, and I'll see you on the next test drive. Interior noise really isn't that bad in this car for it being a mid-engine car where the engine's just 6 inches behind you, and of course being a convertible. Ooh, a Lambo. Ooh, 2 police officers.